Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. Today, we have a very special guest, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. A legend in the space. Maybe it makes him feel uncomfortable when I say that, but at least to me, from class of 2016, he is a legend. And of course, I'm talking about the one, the only Jimmy Song. But before we jump into the show, I want to give a very special shout out to the sponsor of the show, Swan Bitcoin. Best place to build your Bitcoin stack. It's being built by Bitcoiners. It's for Bitcoiners. If you haven't already done so, visit swanbitcoin.com today. And if you go to swan.com/simply, if you make your first purchase, you'll get $10 in Bitcoin for free. So anyways, no more delay. I want to bring Jimmy up on stage. Jimmy, did I make you feel uncomfortable when I called you a Bitcoin legend?
Just a little bit, but that's okay. I've been called lots of other things that have made me much more uncomfortable. So that's not too bad.
Man, you've been in this space a very long time. Could you have ever imagined where we are today? Bitcoin legal tender in a nation state, a public company holding Bitcoin on their balance sheet, BlackRock announcing that they're going, one of the most evil organizations in the world, announcing that they're going to be launching a Bitcoin ETF. And then all of a sudden, the legacy corporate media changes tune. Like, Bitcoin is actually a good thing. What are you talking about? Could you ever have imagined this when you got into the scene?
Well, I kind of could have, because I thought there was a chance that it could become sort of that global reserve currency. And if it's gonna get there at some point in between, all of those things kind of had to happen. What I couldn't imagine was kind of my role. I'm a coder, right? Like I'm a code monkey or whatever, and that's what I was when I first got into the space. Doing podcasts and speaking at conferences and doing stuff like this. That part I didn't imagine. I had no idea that I would have sort of the role, I guess, that I ended up having in this space. And that's the part that's still kind of blowing my mind.
What made you feel so confident that this thing was going to be world reserve currency, especially in the very early days that I think it wasn't so obvious? I mean, I think it's obvious to Bitcoiners, but what made it obvious? Because there's a lot more uncertainty back then, right? There's famous fork wars,
Mhm.
2017.
Mhm.
The China ban,
Mhm.
which ended up being a blessing. So
Mhm.
what made you so certain from the very beginning, the very early days of Bitcoin?
Well, I wasn't certain at the beginning. I just thought it had a chance. I think the reason why I even had that little bit of hope was because I had studied some Austrian economics and so on after the 2008 great financial crisis. And when I finally saw it in 2011, sort of having the coding and math background and the economics sort of education that I had from 2008 just sort of fell into place. And I was like, okay, I'm not sure if this will get there, but it has a chance. And if it has a chance, then it's plus EV to go get some. And that was sort of the calculation in my mind. It wasn't, you know, I'm completely certain that this is going to be the thing that takes over the world or whatever. That conviction I developed later on, but at least at that point in time, just having that little bit of like expectation or probability or calculation in my mind of what could happen was enough for me to sort of dive into it.
Yeah. And I kind of want to talk about that because 2011 is very early days, right?
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people don't fully understand the so many things have been built out since then to
Hmm.
make Bitcoin more accessible to the masses. I'm class of 2016. I'm an Electrum junkie, baby. I'm never gonna leave. They still have Sparrow and all these like new fans, and I'm like, no, you know what? I figured out Electrum. I'm sticking with Electrum. It is my cup of tea. But back then there wasn't even Electrum. There was just Bitcoin Core. So what were those early days like?
Yeah, it was very different, obviously, and I think there were maybe three exchanges in the entire world, and one of them was Mount Gox. That was sort of where you went to go and trade Bitcoin. Um, though, everyone would hang out at bitcointalk.org, and like, there was no Bitcoin community on Twitter, or really even an active Bitcoin subreddit on Reddit. It was just everybody was on Bitcoin Talk, and it wasn't that many people. So I still remember, and I think this forum's still there. News articles on Bitcoin, and you'd maybe see one article a week. That was it. It really didn't have much mind share over people at all. And the little bit of news that you got from the people that were on the forums themselves. You still had stuff like Cassatius Coin and people trying out lots of different things, and there were a lot of other sort of exchanges that had gone bankrupt, and like rug pulls of all kinds and things like that. So it was very much sort of the Wild West back then, and there weren't any education sources or many wallets. You had, I think, a couple of web wallets, all of which rug pulled. You had Bitcoin Core Wallet, but you also had Armory. I think was started around 2011 as well. Um, I ended up working there, which is why I know about it. But there just wasn't very much stuff. So one of the things I talk about sometimes is people have this sort of time travel fantasy, especially about Laszlo and the 10,000 bitcoins for like two pizzas that he traded in the middle of 2010. Like, people like they're it's totally a time travel fantasy, right? Because for them it's, oh, I wish I got in then, and I'd have 10,000 bitcoin, and I'd have like $1 billion or something like that. Well, no, you wouldn't, because there were lots of people that had 10,000 bitcoin back then, but they didn't hold the bitcoin, largely because they didn't understand the economics, or they didn't understand the tech. It was sort of like this plaything for them. And when it got to $5, $6, $8, and they bought it at 25 cents, it was like, oh yeah, I'm selling. I want to book the profit or something like that. That's how they were thinking. And $80,000 is like, oh, that's enough for a car. I can go do that, and just sort of like bank their gains or whatever. It was a very difficult sort of journey at the beginning to know that this would be something someday without like having studied a lot of this stuff. And there weren't that many books. Safety published the Bitcoin Standard, I think, in 2016. That was sort of like the first economics work where like you could really kind of get why this was significant, or like a viable path for it to sort of become that reserve currency. Very few people understood the tech. I still remember coding a lot of this stuff in 2013. There were so few resources for understanding a lot of that stuff, which is why I ended up writing Programming Bitcoin, because I was incredibly frustrated with the material that was out there for just like, as a coder. Okay, what the heck do I do? Like, how do I create a wallet, or what do I do with a private key? What the heck is a private key anyway? And how does it work, and why is it secure, and all of that? Like, very little of that content was out there. Like, nowadays there's just so much content, so many books, so much so many podcasts, so many YouTube videos. There are even hardware wallets and things like that. I mean, like, hardware wallets weren't a thing until like 2015. Like, that tells you that it was very, very difficult back then. And like, that conviction early on, like, very few people had it. And it's honestly only by the grace of God that I have what I have, because I could have been rugged many times. I could have lost it many times. And it was, I got my coins out of Mount Gox in the middle of 2013, for example, thanks to a tip from a friend. It's stuff like that let me sort of hold on to the stack that I have. And it was just really difficult.
And that's a story that you hear over and over again, right? Which is you have a lot of people that accumulated an ungodly enormous stack in the very early days, right? But again, no one really thought of Bitcoin the way that they see Bitcoin now.
Mhm.
Now, you know, for the first time, I don't know, I'm sure you've seen this because, you know, we all kind of live on Bitcoin Twitter in a way, where the amount of coins being held on exchanges just continues to go down.
Mm.
It seems like people are just like, yeah, I'm not going to sell this anymore. This is
Mm.
precious. There's 21 million. But in the beginning, it seemed like that, you know, people were a lot less, you know, I remember there was this story of, maybe you were around during this era, but the famous Bitcoin Faucet that was like giving people, I think it was like, what was it, like 5 or 50 coins or something if you
Oh,
put in your email.
no, it wasn't even an email. It was like a captcha, and you put in your Bitcoin address, and it just automatically sent it. I think Gavin Andreessen set it up initially at 5 Bitcoin. This was like in 2010. I remember going to that faucet in 2011, and I got 0.05 Bitcoin. And I was like, oh man, this is so little. It used to give so much more. Of course, like 0.05 Bitcoin is what, 5 million sats or something like that, which is a lot of money now. I ended up putting that into a web wallet. So man, I am having some. Am I back? It said that there was some connection issues, but okay. Anyway, assuming you can hear me, there was a lot of that, you know, faucets, and you know, people giving you know, stuff away for free, or you know, people selling kind of silly stuff. You know, there were alpaca socks on Bitcoin talk forums that were, I don't know, like 8 Bitcoin per socks or something like that, and people bought them. It's like, oh, cool! I could spend Bitcoin for this stuff. It was kind of crazy, but that's kind of the era that we're coming from, where you know, Bitcoin was worth like $1, so paying $8 for alpaca socks seemed like pretty reasonable. You know, that, like, you know, a lot of us sort of regret spending Bitcoin on that silly stuff, not especially now. But you know, that was kind of what it was back then. People didn't really understand sort of the sound money property. It was more kind of a plaything. You know, it was mostly technical people like me that were trying stuff out. Oh, look at this cool new thing I made, or whatever. And not so much the economics, which turns out to be the much more important thing.
When did you realize this was the real deal? When did you? Because I had a very similar story in the sense that, like, I used Bitcoin
Mm.
as money to buy something online that you couldn't use other money for, to you know, to put it that way.
Mm.
And but I used it as money. I didn't use it as savings.
Mm.
So, you know, and if that was in my case, it would have been 2015
Hmm.
that my first exposure to Bitcoin. But it was a year later that I realized, oh crap, you know, I should be stacking and saving this and
Hmm.
never spending my Bitcoin. So when did it click in your head? Like how did you come to that realization? Okay, this is more than just, you know, fun money or technology.
Hmm.
This thing is savings. Like, this is the real deal. What led you to that realization?
Yeah, I think like everybody else, as the price started going up, you do the math. You know, it's like, wait, I spent how much on this thing, and you know, I still have that story from 2013. There was some guy on the Bitcoin Reddit that posted, "Hey, we're selling beef jerky for Bitcoin. If you want to buy some here, and you can pay here, and so on." So I bought $100 worth of beef jerky in 2013, and this was when it was about what, $400 per Bitcoin. You know, I spent a quarter of a Bitcoin on beef jerky. Now that quarter of a Bitcoin is like $7,500. I mean, it was decent beef jerky, but 10 years later, it's $7,500. I don't know if it was worth it, you know. And that's when you start realizing sort of like the power of saving, and that this is how it should be in any sort of like sound money economy. that's how money behaves, is that you can buy more and more stuff as people become more efficient and new technologies come online and stuff like that. I don't know if you've ever done this with like a computer or whatever, but you buy like a computer or maybe a cell phone or something like that, and then like 2 years later, it's worth like a tiny fraction. And it's like, yeah, but at least I used it. Um, it puts sort of like a different mentality into you as you watch the price of something, or a price of Bitcoin go up. That's kind of how you learn. And I think like very viscerally, that's how most people in Bitcoin learn that it's really a savings tech. That like if you spend it, you end up kind of getting screwed over later in terms in those terms and so on. And I know people that bought cars in like 2012 with their Bitcoin gains. I mean, those would be worth like millions of dollars now. And they just didn't think about it that way. They thought it was more transactional currency and so on. And I mean, like no doubt that it's useful for that, but the far more needed thing, especially in Western Europe or the United States or something like that, is it's a good savings technology. You have plenty of ways to pay for something. You can pay for something with credit card or check, or Venmo or Cash App or Apple Pay or Google Pay or whatever. Like PayPal, there's so many different ways to pay for something. That's not really what's lacking. The thing that's lacking is a good place to store your money or to have savings that's not debased away from you. And really, the only three things that I've been able to identify besides Bitcoin are gold, stocks, and real estate. And it's no coincidence that at least real estate and stocks have been going up like crazy during a period of monetary expansion. So, having something like Bitcoin, like it's that's where the gap in the market is. It's not payment tech, except in places like El Salvador or whatever, there, where you don't have, modern POS systems and stuff like that. So people use Bitcoin as a transaction thing or remittances and things like that. It ends up being a much more useful thing as a savings vehicle. And honestly, the people that have used it that way have seen like insane utility out of it, including myself. And that's where I think it's still needed in large parts of the world, just because inflation is just so rampant, and you're seeing prices go up and so on.
Yeah. Opti's putting smash to like. We
Mhm.
only do that during the live show, man, not during the IRL. Trolling me anyways. Okay. Yeah, man. So you were talking about basically utility. Do you think that we'll ever get to a point, there's like the law of big numbers, right?
Mhm.
It's a lot easier for Bitcoin to get from $1 to $2 than it will be for it to
Mhm.
get to 1 million or 2 million.
Mhm.
Or maybe it's just as easy. Who knows?
Mhm.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, do you ever see it becoming a medium of exchange, especially once it gets to those high price points?
Yeah, absolutely. The way I've observed sort of like currencies sort of go is, you know uh, when at a certain point, merchants don't like the other currencies, and you can see this in hyperinflating countries, where if you try to pay with the local currency that's hyperinflating, they kind of don't like it. They prefer dollars or some other currency, and when the merchant starts demanding it, and they don't give you any other way to pay, that's when you end up sort of giving it up, because you want whatever it is that the merchant has, um, and you have no other choice. And that's if you study any hyperinflating economies, that's what ends up happening during like Weimar Germany, for example. Farmers like had entire storehouses of food, right? And they refused to sell for the depreciating mark. They were just like, we can't buy anything with this. It's like getting away from us too quick, so we just refuse to sell. So you had this like bumper crop of food one particular year, and like nobody could buy food in the cities. You had like a man-made famine from hyperinflation. So in that sort of situation, I bet you the farmers would have sold for gold or something like that, because that holds its value. And I imagine that's what it's going to take. Once you don't have a fiat currency available and you don't have like dollar as a backstop or something like that, at that point, yeah, it becomes a medium of exchange, because that's just what everyone's going to demand. Are you going to take a hyperinflating dollar for your goods and services? Probably not, because there are all kinds of things to consider, especially with so much of it being digital and really being credit and not cash or anything like that. Um, if you're one of the things I observed in Lebanon is that it's entirely cash based at this point, because no one wants to wait 31 days or 45 days to get paid, because that's too much depreciation. So everyone just ends up using cash for everything. You can't use credit card. You can't use you use Lebanese pounds or the U.S. dollar there. So I think that's the point at which Bitcoin really becomes that medium of exchange that everyone ends up using, because that's the point. Like it's all merchant driven. No, it's not a useful medium of exchange if the merchant doesn't take it. I could want to go buy a car at my dealer for Bitcoin, but if the car dealer doesn't take Bitcoin, then I can't transact with it. um, and even if they did have the option of taking Bitcoin, I'm not sure I would, unless I only had Bitcoin, because I'd want to spend my dollars first. um, but if it comes to a point where they're only taking Bitcoin and I really need a car, then that's when those transactions happen. So I suspect that'll be the point at which it becomes sort of that medium of exchange. And honestly, that's going to take some time, because the US dollar has an enormous market to expand into. It's not like a small, like Lebanon, where the only people that use the Lebanese pound are the people in Lebanon, and a large number of them don't like using it, so they use the dollar instead. The U.S. essentially has the entire world to use the dollar, or to expand the dollar into. So it's going to take some time, but at some point it'll happen. And at that point, I think it really will be sort of this transactional currency, the medium of, or the method of payment, I like to say, for like sort of smaller transactions and so on.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that as well. Do you see that? And please, I would love to get your
Mhm.
input on this, Jimmy. I see this happening, and this is I'm so optimistic about Bitcoin adoption in
Mhm.
developing countries.
Mhm.
I see it. The writing's on the wall. Yeah, I'm
Mhm.
personally from Venezuela. I'm originally from Venezuela. I immigrated to the United States.
Mhm.
There, you tell someone Bitcoin, and they're like, "How do I sign up?" That sounds like a great idea. You pitch someone Bitcoin in the States, they're like, it's a 50-50, right? They're
Uh-huh.
like, why not Doge? That's one
Mhm.
answer. And then the
Yeah.
other answer is like, that's boiling the oceans, man.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but again, in Argentine, a Venezuelan, or whatever, they're like, if a non-government currency they cannot debase, where do I sign up? How do I get, how do I get my hands on this? So that's something that I've observed. I want to get your take.
Yeah, and I've seen that in a lot of different places where there's like a core Bitcoin community all over the world. I spent the last I spent this past year traveling with my family and going to a lot of these places, and honestly, they're a lot of these people get it. They understand. The problem is that another large percentage of the world just doesn't get it, right. Like they don't understand how money works. They don't understand the mechanisms of fiat money, central banking, and all of that. So it takes some education, but like brutal reality kind of forces their hand a little bit. Most of them end up going to the dollar, and I'm sure you've seen this in Venezuela as well. They want dollars more than anything, because it's the most liquid. um, and it's understandable, because they're concerned about that liquidity. I think as the dollar inflates more and the debasement of the dollar becomes more and more obvious, the allocation will change. Maybe it'll become 90% dollar and 10% Bitcoin, and slowly change over time. But that's what I suspect will happen. It'll differ for different people. Um, but like for people in hyperinflating countries, they just sort of have to do something now, right? Like it's a common sort of problem, where if your currency is debasing like 10% in a month or something like that, you can't keep it in that currency. You could keep it in the dollar, but that's also debasing at maybe a 0.5% a month or something like that. But that's still enough where over a few years you're losing a significant amount of money. So like having to deal with that and having a longer time horizon, people are going to have to understand it and figure it out. And reality will essentially teach them.
Yeah, and I think that last part, reality will eventually teach them. And I think what I've noticed is the countries that have, to use Gladstein's words, right, that have the most financial privilege, right,
Mm.
where the inflation rate isn't big enough for people to start asking like very difficult questions, and they still take the guy in the suit on TV seriously,
Mhm.
just walking out. And the reality for them, it's ever approaching. But I think that they what I believe that governments and central banks, like I believe like one of the uh the strategies that they use is like this divide and conquer, right,
Mhm.
where like basically whatever political party's in charge or got elected, the opposing political party accuses them of all the economic woes and all the hardships, and then they get voted out eventually, and then they come back, and then the other guy gets, and then they do the other side. But the entire time, um, these people just have been printing money the entire time and just robbing everyone blind. Especially if you're in the lower middle classes, you don't have the means to save in assets. Therefore, you're not
Mhm.
benefiting from all the money printing. You're saving in the fiat money itself. Um, so, I mean, that in itself, does that worry you at all? Specifically, because at least maybe I'm speaking for myself. Like I live in one of those countries that has a tremendous amount of financial privilege,
Mhm.
and I'm seeing the rumblings and I'm seeing the actions by, at least in the case of the US, the current administration, right? They're telling you clear as day that they don't like this thing. In
Mhm.
their eyes, they're releasing papers. The US Treasury released a paper called the Future of Money.
Mhm.
They literally released a paper called The Future of Money. In that entire paper, they don't mention Bitcoin. They mention stable coins and payment platforms. Like it's so
Mhm.
hilarious. And then they tell you it's very inefficient use of energy. Then they say we're gonna tax the mining industry 30%. Forget
Mhm.
about all the other energy intensive industries. It's just the mining industry that we're going to tax 30%.
Mhm.
So, does that worry you a little bit? The reaction from the governments that have the most to lose if Bitcoin succeeds, because these are the governments that have the privilege of truly being able to create money for free that everyone else has to work for. And then by doing that, being able to basically fund this crazy bureaucracy, this crazy government.
Yeah, that's been happening for a long time, and you can go look at WTF happened in 1971, but bureaucracy in pretty much everything has bloated exponentially. This is why you go all over the world. Both parents work everywhere. Birth rates are coming down everywhere. Why? Because everyone has to work. They have to go serve the state. The rent-seeking class, the bureaucracy, the Cantillon winners instead of themselves. And this has been what's happening. Um, so in that sense, like all of these policies and proposals and stuff like that, it's to perpetuate the current system, and it's trying to continue the grift, the scam, um, the thing that they've been doing all along. But I think people are starting to wake up to it, and you can kind of see it in a lot of different parts of the world. A lot of places I traveled, there were still like protests about all kinds of stuff. It could be from the left, it could be from the right, it could be various different issues or whatever, but there is sort of like this sense that something is deeply wrong. Um, and, there's at least a core group of people that aren't just going to take it. Now, they could try to tax things or whatever, but that's just going to get the Bitcoiners to leave, the people that want to build and create. Um, and that's going to be the detriment. Now, like it's interesting because the United States has had this major exorbitant privilege of being able to money print. And that means that generally the most talented people will come to the United States because success in the United States means like many billions of dollars, whereas success elsewhere, I mean, you can still do well, but it's only in the millions. So a lot of talented people end up in the United States for that reason. Well, if you think about sort of like the downfall of the dollar and the creation of newer systems, well, where are the most talented people going to go? Well, it's going to be the place with lots of Bitcoin. And so I think governments will have to compete for the people, especially with population declines all over the world and so on. That's going to mean that whoever sets up the best jurisdiction, they're going to be the ones that benefit. And if you have sort of like anti-Bitcoin policies, well, you're kind of going to pay for it by losing the productive people, essentially.
So I'm assuming you're a fan of the theory from the book The Sovereign Individual, because that sure sounded like it.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, a lot of those predictions have come true. A lot of them have not, and so on. And I have read it, but I mean, this is just simple game theory, right? Like
Mm.
if you kick people out, then they're gonna go somewhere else. There's a reason why, like Monaco. If you look at Monaco, right, tiny principality in Europe, not very big, but property prices there are insane. And every car there is like if you own a Porsche there, that's considered like a low class car because it's like filled with Lamborghinis and stuff. Why is that? Well, they have really good tax policy, so everybody rich wants to move there. That's kind of what ends up happening when you treat the people well. Is that the rich people, the productive people, and the like buying property there and so on. So I expect jurisdictions to fight over people, but I also expect jurisdictions to get smaller. A large
Mm.
reason why countries are so big is for monetary union purposes. So you essentially have free trade within the borders of that jurisdiction. But if you have a money that's independent of that and is convenient and you can use it everywhere, then there's no reason for it to be one giant union because free trade can happen without all of that. And that's what I'm guessing will happen. Like the United States, for example, like downtown San Francisco like shares very little in common with Omaha, Nebraska, or some rural community or something like that. And they should probably govern themselves. And I suspect that at some point, as the monetary union collapses, then what else is going to keep it together? I'm not really sure. I mean, maybe common defense, something like that, but uh, at least in the U.S., I don't see foreign invasion or anything like that as a real, or at least warfare wise, as a real possibility. So, um, yeah, I think states will become smaller.
Yeah, and that's actually, I completely agree, right? Because again, what is that common denominator? What is the common denominator between a state like California and a state like Florida, which has radically different ideologies in terms of in terms of how they're governed, the people that live there, and what is the common union? The common union is the fiat currency. It's the money. right? Would California and Florida be, as as would they be as would they consider themselves the same country, the same union, if that same currency wasn't being used, right? And then there's autonomy to it, because if the same currency isn't being used in California and Florida, then what incentive do those governments have to to I guess have get the I don't know how I'm trying to articulate this, but it's like, yes, I guess to add to your point, Jimmy, I completely agree. I think
Hmm.
that you are going to see a balkanization. I think
Hmm.
that's inevitable. I think the only thing that's keeping together these giant countries is the fact that they use the same money. I think
Yeah.
that once you get rid of that element, I don't see them. I don't see the necessity to cooperate the way that they're cooperating now.
Yeah, and not just cooperate, but you have like a single law for everybody, right? Like you have federal governments and so on, and people want to be governed differently. They want to try different things. I'm not a fan of socialism, but if a small community wants to try it out, go for it, right? Like I'm not going to tell them no, but if you're going to impose it on me, that's when we're going to have a problem, right? So this is where you know you want more experimentation, especially in governance and stuff like that, because we haven't really like everyone sort of trends towards this monolithic authoritarian communism ish thing. Every government seems to be trending towards that, and that's not good for anybody. It's less freedom for the people. That even the elites, I suspect, don't really like it, because you have to surveil everyone and you have to constantly be looking out for people that might be taking your place and might come and kill you or something like that. Like, just instead of having a single policy over a very vast area that's very, very different, give each place sovereignty. And that was sort of the original idea behind the United States. The original 13 colonies, they sort of, at least before the Constitution and so on, between after the end of the Revolutionary War and before the Constitution, they acted like their own nations, right? Each little state, uh, and that was the model. Now, it wasn't really that workable because they had all this debt from the Revolutionary War and so on. But that's something that could have worked, and at least on paper, that's what states are supposed to be. They're supposed to be, they're sovereign nations, and you sort of have this economic union that became more than that post Abraham Lincoln. It could be a very different system, and I would like to see more experimentation, just because I don't think we've found what works in many ways, because there just aren't enough experiments going on. If you had 1,000 jurisdictions that were trying all kinds of different things, then you find out very quickly, okay, this works, this doesn't, because you get markets, you get people voting with their feet, people trying different things, and okay, there's a lot of prosperity there. What are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? And that would be a good thing, instead of monolithic. I think there's like maybe 300 countries in the world right now. Like, everybody lives under a flag, basically. Um, why do we have to have that? I think smaller states would be more local, more responsive to their populace, better, uh, you know, more experimental and trying different things and seeing, like, instead of arguing about, okay, well, we should do more green energy or whatever. Well, have a jurisdiction try green energy. If it doesn't work, then we can find out very quickly and not screw over the entire country and get us into like economic stupidity. Like, try different things, right? But instead of having imposing it on people that don't want it, have smaller jurisdictions where they're welcoming it. I'm fine with San Francisco trying UBI, like that's fine if that's what they want to do. Let's see how it works out economically for them, right? Like that's how you find out whether or not something works. So I yeah, it just bothers me that um, that instead of reality being sort of the judge, it ends up becoming politics and rhetoric and propaganda and things like that, which end up deciding a lot of this stuff.
100%. And that's only viable
Mm,
with a money printer, right? Like that
mm,
system is only viable with the money printer. I would even say that certain collectivist ideology are only viable with the money printer as well. I think that if you remove the wealth redistribution mechanism altogether, um, then it becomes very difficult to offer UBI. It becomes very difficult to offer, all these free things that, if you study economics, they're not free.
mhm.
There's $100 getting taken out of your back pocket, and you're given 20, and you're like, I got $20 for free. Look at that. Anyway, so we're talking about competition. And I really want to talk about the nation state, the country that is a shining country, shining city on the hill, as the expression is, something that I talked about today. Something to me that I hold near and dear to my heart as a Latin America, as someone who, had the privilege to be able to immigrate to the United States. I really do all see El Salvador as this country of hope and freedom. And I've spoken to El Salvadorians, not double. I've spoken to one El Salvadorian, and then my producer, Opti, in the back. Shout out to him, my brother. He also had a story that he told on today's Simply Bitcoin Live, where he ran into this El Salvadorian kid, and he asked him, like, "What do you think about Nayib Bukele?" And the kid's like, "This guy's an inspiration. I want to go back." As someone who lives in Miami, okay,
Mm,
where that's like the pinnacle. If you immigrate from Latin America
mhm,
and you make it to the States and you make it to Miami, that is the pinnacle. Okay. You don't go backwards. You don't go backwards.
mhm,
The fact that you're hearing El Salvadorians say, "I want to go back because of Nayib Bukele,"
uh-huh,
tells me, holy cow, there's something beautiful happening there, right?
mhm,
There's something good there. There's something good happening there. And I was thinking about it today, Jimmy. I was like, okay, it can't be a coincidence that the first country that adopted Bitcoin is also it's also one of the first functioning countries in Latin America that is
mhm,
doing good by its people. And the
mhm,
only conclusion that I got to is like, I think this is the first government that you're seeing on planet Earth, that the reason that they're doing that, the reason that Bukele is doing good by its people, is because the unit of account that they're using has aligned incentives versus
mhm,
fiat has misaligned incentives. So it's
mhm.
just a crazy thought. Maybe I'm an insane Bitcoin hopeful Bitcoiner. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I would love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. And the thing that I've noticed about El Salvador, and I've been there twice, and I'm going there this weekend. So I was there January of last year and June of last year. And the thing that I noticed was just in those 6 months, like stuff changed really fast. They were putting in sewer lines at the community in Bitcoin Beach, and the roads were getting repaved, and in San Salvador there were like bike lanes. That's like the stuff that you see in like major European cities are bike lanes, so people can ride bikes everywhere. Yeah, stuff like that. You can just sort of see the change happening. Um, and what you said is right. There is the money affects everything, and what I found out from just studying some of the IMF stuff is that most of these governments in Latin America, in pretty much everywhere, you have to align with the U.S. You're forced to align with the U.S. And the way this works is that they want to develop their country in some way, so they take out a loan. Now, it might be for an airport, it might be for, I don't know, new military equipment, whatever it is. But they usually just can't afford it because they're not collecting enough in taxes, so they get a loan. Or where do they get the loan from? They generally have to deal with like a U.S. bank, or if you're in other parts of the world, maybe like a Euro bank or something like that, and get loans in the euro dollar, because the dollar is the global reserve currency for any international transaction, stuff that you need to buy. You need to use dollars to go get them. So they get that loan, and then they mismanage things. They can't pay it back. Boom, the IMF steps in. And they do what's a bailout, but it's not really a bailout of the country. They're bailing out the bankers. So they'll bail out the banker that loaned them that money. They take over the loan and say, okay, well, we'll start forgiving this loan, but you're going to have to do things our way. And that usually means some sort of austerity measures of some kind, and they demand some form of budgetary control. So if your country's budget's, I don't know, $100 million, you could spend at most 10 million on infrastructure, or and you have to spend this much and this much, and you basically have been taken over by the IMF, and eventually you end up selling the resources of your nation to uh, you know uh, U.S. firms or something like that. You basically have to sell off stuff, and this is where we get the phrase "banana republic." Chiquita Banana ended up like owning large portions of Latin America, so they could produce bananas out of these places, and it was through this mechanism, right? Like they essentially got to own these places through financial games, essentially, because the IMF budget comes from U.S. money printing. So it's money created out of nothing that's weaponized to go get resources from these places. Now, what's different in El Salvador is that Nayib Bukele is part of, and Bitcoin is part of this entire program, is saying, you know what, let's not depend on the IMF. Let's figure out a way to make it work without the IMF, because out of the four previous presidents to Nayib Bukele, three of them are in prison for embezzlement, right? Like it's horribly corrupt. And the two opposition parties to Nayib Bukele are all pro IMF. They're all pro. Hey, we got to do what they say, and let agree to their austerity measures and stuff like that. And we can only spend this much on infrastructure and so on. Instead, Nayib Bukele is basically giving them the middle finger. They're issuing bonds and getting money from the market instead of through the IMF, and they're able to spend money the way they want to. And guess what? They want to build infrastructure. They want to increase police presence. They want to make sure that things are safe for business, and make sure that people can engage in commerce and things like that. Stuff that, frankly, the IMF doesn't care that much about. They just want like the resources of the country, and not don't care about the people. So he's able to respond to what the people want. And it's really, instead of being ruled by the International Monetary Order, they're being they're able to elect somebody that's like going to do what they want. And it's become a self-sovereign nation. And you were mentioning sort of Latin Americans in Miami. That's sort of like the top. And from what I understand, like after that is maybe like people from Mexico, because they're like closest to the US, and I don't know, maybe uh from Colombia or something. And then all the way down at the bottom was El Salvador, right? Like if you're from El Salvador, you're at the very bottom of this sort of like Central American status ladder. They've climbed that, right? Like they're no longer part of this other system. So there's motivation for people to go over there, because, well, you're not shackled by IMF debt and things like that, or austerity measures or whatever. can actually create things and make things and make money. That's really why people come to the U.S., because they want to make money. Well, if you can make money there, why wouldn't you? And this is why a lot of Salvadorans that I've met or heard about in the United States, they're like, I illegally immigrated here like 20 years ago, but I want to go back. You know,
Hmm.
and it's for good reason, because there's opportunity there. Like the whole reason they came to the U.S. in the first place was opportunity. Well, if there's opportunity back home and it's your own culture and your family's there and everything else, of course they'd want to go back. So it's flipping back the influence of the U.S. dollar over a lot of these countries, and I think that's basically what's happened in El Salvador, and this is something that I think a lot of other world leaders are watching, because they want that self sovereignty too. And a lot of the people in Latin America are watching El Salvador for that reason, because they're like, wait, what? He's doing what? How is that possible? Why? How are they able to do this, that, and whatever? Um, and they're realizing it's really the dollar hegemony that's been oppressing them the whole time.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And and in a way, it's a bit of cosmic justice.
Mm,
But at the same time, maybe I was naive, but I was sold, and I know Opti feels the same way. It I was sold a version of America that I think is so unique in the
mm,
world, and I think that fiat money and how that's allowed the federal government to grow to the size that it has completely Frankensteined that version of what you believe America is, and maybe that was completely naive. I'm getting to the point. I don't want to name any names or be specific. Where there's people that I know that are considering or have even renounced their citizenship,
mhm,
because they don't see the net benefit anymore.
mm,
And I do see that pattern continuing.
mm,
And I don't know what that world is that world that we're heading in is going to look like.
mm,
This balkanized world where there isn't this one major power that basically tells everybody else what to do.
mm.
Um, so I don't know. I'm definitely it's definitely a great ride along the way, and it definitely gives me stuff to talk about every day.
Yeah, who knows what that looks like, but I do know that people figure things out, and you don't need um, sort of centralized control of everything in order for things to run smoothly. There are other organizations that can work and stuff. I, uh, I sort of shit on the U.S. dollar hegemony and stuff, but it's not all bad. There's something called Pax Americana. There's been basically free trade all over the world for a while now, since Bretton Woods, essentially, and that's due to sort of the peace that America has been keeping. But that comes at a cost, of course, because the U.S. ends up being a third party to every conflict anywhere. So you see the U.S. in peace talks wherever, right? Like it could be between like Pakistan and India on the other side of the world, but like they have to be involved somehow, because well, they control the money. The money is always a third party. um and we have a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and again, that's very far away from the US, but the US ends up in the middle of it. You have a conflict between North and South Vietnam, they end up in the middle of it. You have conflicts in the Middle East, they end up in the middle of it. It's largely because of the dollar hegemony that the US ends up in a lot of this stuff. And if you take that away, what takes its place? I mean, those are all really good questions, and I'm very curious about how that will all work, because there is certainly a lot of efficiency in in sort of like the scale that we produce things at, where a lot of stuff ends up going to China and being produced there and shipped back, and you're able to ship like a T-shirt from China all the way to your local mall for like 17 cents or something ridiculously cheap, because they're able to do it at such an enormous scale. How does that get affected if the scales aren't quite as big? And is the efficiency that you gain from removing bureaucracy going to overcome sort of like the slightly less efficiency from having lots of different factories all over the world sort of like competing and stuff? I don't know. And the world is essentially ordered around the dollar hegemony right now, and figuring out how that changes as that dollar hegemony starts to crumble is one of the big questions for the century. Honestly, we're 23 years into it now, but this is the question: is what happens as the dollar crumbles? And I don't know whether it's a bipolar world with BRICS on one side and NATO on the other, or if it's like a multipolar world, or you have thousands of small sovereign states on a Bitcoin standard. I don't know. Whatever it is, the world needs to reorder itself, because right now everything's ordered around the dollar hegemony. And what it looks like when it's not is the big question.
Yeah, 100%. That is the 1 million sat question. It's not the $1 million question anymore. It's the 1 million sat. But yeah, very interesting times ahead. Anyways, Jimmy, I want to use the last 5 minutes or so to talk about a conference that you helped launch. And I was very, very privileged to be able to have a conversation with Alex Gladstein. We were talking on his book, and what I'm referring to everybody is the Thank God for Bitcoin.
Mhm.
I thought it was amazing. The production value of the team over there. They did an absolutely incredible job. So I just kind of want to ask you, like, why Thank God for Bitcoin? Like, why that specific name? Why are you, including God in the picture?
Yeah, the reason for the conference's name is because of the book's name, and the book's name is "Thank God for Bitcoin," and you can go check it out at Amazon and buy it. I think it's been translated to a couple languages already. So if you're, I think it's Dutch and maybe some. I know Spanish and Portuguese were in the works, but I don't know where that is at the moment. But that the book is the reason why the conference is named what it is, and the book came out of Bible study that we did during the pandemic. You know, I wanted to keep meeting with people during a time when everyone was basically locked indoors. Um, so we started a Bible study, and we studied a couple of Christian economics texts. The Ethics of Money Production by Georg Guido Halsman, and Honest Money by Gary North. And at the end of them, we learned a lot, but we also realized that we could write a more updated version, because neither of those books really took into account Bitcoin. So we wrote the book based on that, and we didn't really expect the reception that it's had, which has been fantastic. It's I think one of I've written 4 books. It's probably the best selling book that I've written, and it's we wanted to you know give a different sort of argument, and it's an argument based on morals and the way things ought to be based on biblical morality, and sort of making that argument to Christians, because honestly a lot of Christians don't think about monetary policy or anything like that. And we've made that argument, and we wanted to keep that at the forefront. And there was certainly a lot of Christian Bitcoiners that were interested in meeting together, and that's what led to the conference. So yeah, and it's been very interesting.
Um, Very interesting to say the least. And there's something that I've noticed, Jimmy, and I'm confident that you've noticed it as well.
Hmm.
Is that I guess that if you can make the argument that fiat money is untethered from reality, is
Hmm.
untethered from truth, right? And you can make the argument that Bitcoin is tethered to
Hmm.
reality, therefore
Hmm.
tethered to the truth by
Hmm.
proof of work. And
Hmm.
then, of course, I usually don't like to talk about this, but as a Christian, what do you believe? God is truth, right?
Hmm.
Is there something there? Um,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The main thing is that when you deny reality, you kind of go off the rails very, very quickly. And fiat money is very much like that. It was tethered to reality, right? Each each dollar represented a certain amount of gold up until 1971, basically. Up until 1933, I think or 33 it was. Each You could submit $20.67 to any bank, and they would give you 1 ounce of gold. That's what it represented. Uh, FDR changed that with Executive Order 6102, and then a year later they devalued it and made it $35 per ounce. And then in 1971, Nixon completely cut ties to gold. But that's essentially when it became untethered. It used to represent a particular amount of gold, but then when you cut that off, now it's free floating and it has no anchor anymore, and it's been spiraling out of control ever since. And this is where we get crazy inflation and so on. Hyperinflation is essentially just things going crazy because it has no basis in reality whatsoever. The dollar is still, I guess, you could argue with the petrodollar that it has some anchor with reality because of that. But essentially, like, having no anchor is very bad because there's no way to value anything. Um, and in the same way, I would say, with morals and ethics, if you have Christian values and you believe in Christ, then it makes a lot of sense. But once you untether from God, then where do your morals and ethics come from? And this isn't something that some Christian philosopher asked. This was what Friedrich Nietzsche asked, right? Like his entire philosophical exploration was what happens then, right? Like you've taken out God, you've untethered from the sun. Where does your morality come from? And he came out with this entire different system of morality based on will to power. And I mean, at least in my reading, it's basically being a sociopath and like that's where you end up, because you're not tethered to anything. uh and I think most people find that kind of morality completely abhorrent. I would consider people like Hitler or Stalin like Nietzschean in that way, because they were all about power and exercising that power. um and this is where having some basis or some link to reality is so important. And this is why I think for Christians, they can see the reality of fiat money as saying, okay, well, that doesn't have any real basis, and look at Bitcoin and say that does have a real basis, and therefore it's truer. And that's I guess one of the more subtle arguments in the book. um, but I think it goes the other way too. Bitcoiners start recognizing that, okay, having a linked reality is very good because it keeps it scarce, and that gives it a lot more utility, especially as a savings vehicle and so on. And they start investigating and start realizing, okay, well, what about all of this other stuff? Does that have a basis in reality? and a lot of them find Christ as well. So for me, like truth leads to truth always. And if you found truth in one area of your life, it just tastes so good. It's so useful and so satisfying that you seek it in other places in your life. And a lot of people thankfully have found that.
100%. And Jimmy, this has been an honor and a privilege to have you, join me on Simply Bitcoin Live. Uh, you know, I said in the very beginning, I'm going to fanboy once again. Definitely a legend in the space, and so much work that you've contributed, so much work that I've consumed that you've made, and having the privilege of being able to be part of the Thank God for Bitcoin, conference as well. That was incredible. So I'm extremely thankful, Jimmy, for you coming on the show today. Is there anything that you want to tell the audience that you're working on nowadays, that you're thinking about? Have you, let me ask you something. Have you reached the end of the rabbit hole?
No. And I'm actually finishing up a book, Fiat Ruins Everything, and that
Oh,
should be out very soon in the next month or two. And please go pick up a copy. I'll be doing a Kickstarter of some kind in the next month or so, and please participate too.
awesome. All right. Well, Jimmy, thank you so much. I'm going to put you backstage while I wrap this up. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. We really appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow with the live show, 12:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But until then, I'll see you guys later. Peace out.